and thanks for the invitation to be here. I've only a few minutes, so I try to cover a number of issues. The argument has often been made that energy poverty or fuel poverty will be addressed in effect by this kind of new approach. The reality of fuel poverty, of energy poverty as it would be more correctly titled nowadays, is real. More than 2/3 of all of the poorest 10% of the population are living in fuel poverty. Over half of the working poor, that is, over half of those who have a job but are living in poverty, over half of those live with fuel poverty. Now, in a fuel poverty situation, people are being forced to make choices. The income they have is so low that they have to make a choice between fuel and food. And very often, particularly older people, they will make the choice in favour of fuel rather than food. So to have sufficient fuel, sufficient energy supply to provide basics, they in effect are having to go hungry. They don't have the food required that they would require. Now, it would seem to me that the claim that therefore we should go the route that's being proposed with all this wind energy stuff is extremely dubious. The whole issue that in some way there's going to be lower costs and that the evidence would show that, well, it doesn't seem that obvious to me. In fact, I don't see the evidence at all. So it seems to me that that's a very dubious argument to be making in favour of the current thrust. The second issue in that context is that there's an argument made that, well, this particular approach will create jobs, and jobs are very important, and we have to support jobs in one form or another, no matter where they come from. And it seems to me that an enormous amount of bad initiatives and things we should be doing without or should not be supporting are being justified on this basis. Now, it seems to me this is actually quite crazy. Because if you want to maximize the number of jobs and ensure that everybody has one, there's a very simple way of doing it. It doesn't make any sense, but there's a very sensible way of doing it. Sorry, there's a way of doing it that isn't very sensible. It's not very sensible. And that is basically, why don't we declare a war on somebody and basically decide to increase the army by 250,000 people and introduce conscription for everybody who's unemployed as long as they're under 65. And in that process, in a single stroke, you have full employment, everybody is in the army, and you have solved your jobs problem and your unemployment problem. Obviously, that's totally, completely and utterly daft, and nobody will actually go that route. But very often it seems to me that that's the kind of argument that's being put into place when people say, well, let's do this because the jobs will be that. Well, it seems to me that we should be doing things the other way around. We should be taking initiatives and putting things in place because they're worth doing, because they're the right thing to do, and if they produce jobs, that's a big bonus and excellent. Now, don't go out there, anybody, and say Sean Healey is against job creation. He's not. I've been accused of this before, wrongly. I'm not against job creation. It was the issue of the broader third world, the global south, maybe to be giving it its correct title these days. There's a huge problem with climate change. I have said before, and I say it again, that climate change is probably the game changer of the 21st century. It will be the issue that will force us as a world to address very dramatic change. And I think that's a very critical issue. Part of our problem, however, is that we're kind of dumping responsibility on poorer countries or on other areas. So, for example, simply because Africa's carbon footprint is very low, we just shift our business manufacturing and stuff into low carbon areas so their carbon footprint can grow. But of course, in the global context, that's under some kind of illusion that the climate there isn't going to have an effect on the climate here, and like this again, living in kind of cuckoo land. So it seems to me that we need, at a global level, a proper, integrated, comprehensive approach to actually addressing issues around climate change and kind of dealing with it in some kind of isolated way in one area is not a very sensible way to deal with it. We all have to make a contribution, absolutely. That's very, very important. But in some way or other to say, okay, we can dump the bad pieces over there and we'll keep the good pieces and build something positive in that way, and we can go around feeling good about ourselves because we're doing something that's positive in terms of the changes out there on climate, is actually missing at the very core point. It's just illusion that we're actually creating. Finally, I want to deal with an issue close to my own heart that I have argued about for a long time, and I think is at the core of this issue. And it's the issue of democratic deficit. We are living at a time of enormous democratic deficit. Not just on issues like this, but from the European Union, to national level, and not just Ireland, but across many other countries, to local level. It seems to me that we're living in a situation where, and you've heard this so often, politicians say, well, we were elected, we have a mandate, and we're going to implement whatever we ran up for election on, and we have the right to do that. And what that strikes me as is very much sort of the way John Redmond would have felt in 1914 as he argued the case for Irish Home Rule in the British House of Parliament at that time. And it was very appropriate at that time. And the reason was that travel was very difficult, communications was very slow, so we had a system of democracy in which we elected people, sent them off for 4 or 5 years, and they did what they did. We found out about it slowly and over time, and they only came and saw us in odd time because travel was difficult and so on. And after 4 or 5 years, if we were happy with them, we kept them, and if we weren't, we threw them out and elected somebody else. The world, of course, is different. We're not living in 1914. We're living in 2014. So communication is instant, travel is easy, people are far more educated for issues than many of the politicians that are elected and discussing it in the national parliament, and a whole lot of other things. So I believe myself that we need to face up to the fact that we're living in 2014 and not 1914, and that you cannot run a modern democracy without the engagement of all the sectors in society, community, voluntary, social inclusion, environmental, and other sectors, business, trade unions, farmers, all the various sectors. They all need to be involved in governance. We have a governance problem of real substance in Ireland, and it isn't just in Ireland, it's far beyond it. If you want to think about the European Union and how it makes decisions that impact on people without ever consulting those people, think about what has happened to Ireland since 2008. The whole bailout process and all the various things that we have been forced on us on the basis of a great deal of false analysis and an enormous amount of very effective spinning. And I think that there are very serious issues, because what we're living in at this moment as a result of all that is the biggest transfer of resources from poor and middle income people to the rich, by which I'm talking about corporates, bankers and all these kinds of people, plus high net worth individuals. Now, it seems to me we have a democratic deficit issue, and that needs to be dealt with. And the way to deal with it is highlighted in the core of this issue here. We should have engagement. I reject the idea of just consultation. Consultation, we have had so many examples of consultation which are simply tick-boxing exercises, and the boxes are ticked, all the stuff is collated, and it goes into the nearest shredder. It is irrelevant. We need genuine engagement. We need more deliberative democracy. Not this kind of consultation that in some way or other there's a pretense that people are being consulted. So we need genuine consultation. But that means deliberation, engagement, real engagement. But if that's to happen, we need evidence. And all of the evidence on all of the issues, whatever the issues being discussed are, need to be on the table and available to all stakeholders. And local communities are stakeholders, and all the various other sectors of society are stakeholders within communities. So we need the evidence, we need the engagement and the participation in the decision-making process. No society today can expect that a local community or a national community will take responsibility for decisions made that they did not have a real engagement in shaping. And nobody in a modern democracy today can genuinely expect real responsibility to be taken by people for decisions that were taken on the basis of half the evidence. We need all of the evidence. So I think what that would do is that would allow all the sectors of society to sit together to develop, to promote the well-being of this and future generations. That should be the core of public policy, whether it's local, national, issue, or across the whole broad gamut. So I think, in a way, I think this is very central to that. This particular issue is very, very central to that whole process, that whole area that I think is critical for our future. I would say congratulations to Windaware Ireland today on the launch of their excellent website. I'm delighted to be associated with it. Thank you very much.